everyone, welcome back to the bunker. I'm Captain Logan. You made me watch this time The Men Who Stare at Goats. This is a request from Marie Flowers, and this is a curious movie that initially I was like, I don't know why somebody wants to know what I think about this particular movie. This is a based on a true story thing. It's a kind of army movie, not really a war movie, but it's about guys in the military that put together a secret operation to, get this, and again, apparently this actually happened to some degree. This is a fiction based on real events, but this part of it apparently is true. There was an organization in the 80s, in the movie they're called the Jedi. I don't know if that is true. And they are doing research into trying to replace regular warfare violence with psychic powers. And so they're looking into like new age medicine and stuff, and a lot of stuff that looks really goofy and crackpot and can't possibly, it seems like, be real. And it's interesting and really odd that that actually happened, and this is based on a book about those events, and kind of a curious thing to make a movie about. And then in the first couple of minutes, I realized why Marie probably wanted me to look at this, and it's because, again, it's about superpowers. But is it about superpowers? And the question all the way through this is, of course, whether or not the things that George Clooney's character, this is starring Hugh McGregor and George Clooney, and George Clooney was initially the leader of this secret military group. He's like the head Jedi. The question is, are these things actually possible, or is it just a whole lot of coincidence that looks like there were actually some kind of psychic powers being used? And so Hugh McGregor plays a journalist who is down on his luck and kind of in a bad broken part of his life where his wife has left him, and he's trying to impress her with putting out a big story. It's that kind of typical, the traditional cliche thing where a guy thinks that his wife has left him because he's not manly enough, and the guy that she gets with is real butch and tough and macho, and so he's got to go, he thinks, over to Iraq and try to, this is in the early 2000s, again the movie came out in 2009, but it's about events from a few years before that, and so he wants to go over to Iraq and report on what's going on over there and put himself in harm's way to prove to her that he's a real man. And in the process of attempting to do that, because there's, of course, a lot of major journalists from major news outlets that are able to get over into Iraq, but he's not able to get in. And he's in Kuwait, constantly trying to figure out some way to get in, and the journalists won't talk to him, and he's just real lonely and by himself, and nobody cares about him. And he ends up meeting George Clooney's character and recognizes his name because he had met a guy from years earlier, and this is where the first big coincidence comes in. And when I say coincidence, I'm not complaining that the narrative does things that are too coincidental, because this is a story that's all about coincidence, and it's coincidence versus destiny. And so he had met a guy that we get in a flashback at the beginning of the story who claimed that he was part of this secret organization and that he was able to do things like look at goats and make them die just by staring at them intently. That, like, with his brain, he could kill goats. And there's all these different powers throughout the movie that and abilities that come from different kinds of again, like new age medicine things and different cultures, and a lot of it, of course, sounds really ethereal and ridiculous and this kind of over-the-top mind-over-matter stuff. And from the very beginning, I was kind of surprised that, first of all, that the title of the movie is dropped in like 2 minutes. The Men Who Stare at Goats, or at least the idea of staring at goats is there right away. And I figured that was probably like a metaphor or a euphemism or something when I looked at the title. But no, it's literally Men Who Stare at Goats. And you've got all these other abilities like cloud bursting and like literally the Jedi mind trick is attempted. There's this thing that's like glitter eyes, where like you look at somebody in a weird way like this, and then it somehow like hypnotizes them or freaks them out or something. And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but he, having heard that name before, actually meets that guy, and it's like, well, this is weird, like, what are the odds? And is just desperate for some kind of a story and some kind of a way to get into Iraq, and George Clooney is actually going over there. So George Clooney's character's name is Bob, and Ewan McGregor's character's name is Lynn. And so Lynn convinces Bob, or actually initially doesn't. Bob doesn't want anything to do with him. He tells him a lot of things about the military organization, but then when Bob wants to kind of shadow him, when Lynn wants to shadow him, Bob's like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. Let's not do that. I don't want the attention, I don't want the fame, and it's probably because people don't believe him and he's going to look like a crackpot, and he absolutely does. And again, Lynn is just desperate for a story, and so the reason Bob finally lets him go with him is because he's got the eye from the pyramid drawn in a notebook, and it's revealed later that that is tattooed on Bob's chest. And so again, there's just like all of these like surprising coincidences, and you have to kind of decide for yourself, is it Providence that connects all these things together and makes this happen, or is it just sheer dumb luck? And the movie is pretty ambiguous about that, and I enjoyed the ambiguity of it. I'm of two minds about a lot of stuff in this movie, but one of the big ones is Ewan McGregor's character Lynn seems to be duped too easily by Bob, where he's buying into what seems like sheer and utter nonsense really early. Like, at first it seems like maybe he's just humoring him, but then he keeps saying things like, well, this is a bigger story than the one I was going to go cover. And it's not if it's all nonsense, if it's all ridiculous. And I might have thought that he would just use Bob to let him get over into Iraq and then leave him after that and be like, yeah, sayonara, you're a crazy person, I'm gonna go off on my own. But he doesn't do that. He remains really curious about him. And I'm of two minds about it, because eventually I start to kind of believe that he's buying into the stuff that George Clooney's character is feeding him, because there are moments where there seems to be, if not a little bit of truth to it, again, ambiguity. It's a question. There are moments where Bob, George Clooney's character, will do stuff that seems like it could actually be, there could be a grain of truth to the psychic powers he claims to have, or it might just be he got lucky, or it might just be that he did accomplish the thing he was trying to accomplish, but it wasn't actually because of the power. It was because of something else. Like, if you do the glitterize thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually hypnotize the weak-willed person. It might be just because they were freaked out that you were looking at them weird, and so you were able to dispatch of them in the moment. A lot of wacky hijinks ensue. This is a somewhat slapsticky kind of movie. This is a straight-up comedy, I should mention, and it is pitched as, it's advertised as kind of a black comedy. I didn't find it edgy in the way that I think maybe it wants to be. That's a complaint that some other reviewers have of this movie as well. And it was, and I agree with that. It's some of the kind of physical comedy I didn't think was as funny as the movie wants me to think it is, and some of it is just taste stuff. There's some drug humor in this that I get why it's supposed to be funny, but but it just didn't really make me laugh. There's a whole thing with LSD at the end that is a fun plot point, but it's not like laugh out loud hysterical, and I thought it went on a little too long for my taste. So some of this is just, not exactly for me, but it's a real solid story. It's competently made, but a lot of wacky hijinks, including not one, but two car wrecks or car breakdowns in the desert. We are, of course, in the desert quite a bit in this movie, which is an appropriate locale because of the notion of mind over matter and like making reality what you want it to be through sheer force of will. So that kind of evokes the notion of mirages. So I like all the desert imagery. I think it makes a lot of sense to have that. And some of the casting is really fun in this movie. Ewan McGregor, it cannot be a coincidence, is in this movie because of the whole Jedi idea. It's kind of fun to have a scene where George Clooney is saying, we were the Jedi, and he says, I have no idea what that is. And of course, he's been Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he was a Jedi, like an actual Star Wars Jedi, and I think that's really funny. That whole organization was made in 1980, so just after Star Wars, and so Star Wars is all the rage, and it makes a lot of sense that they would call themselves that. And there's a lot of kind of Star Wars undertone thematic stuff in this, where not only are these guys, again, doing this mind over matter thing, acting as if there is such a thing as the Force. They're not talking about it like that, but they think that they really do have mind powers, or that, I don't know if the idea is supposed to be, because they're really vague about it, of course. It feels kind of BS-y, more than BS-y, where we... some people maybe have psychic powers, or maybe if you just teach a person to believe enough that they have that, suddenly they will have that. I'm not sure which it's supposed to be for George Clooney's character, or for the guy who's supposed to be the best of them, who is hilariously played by Jeff Bridges. I like him a lot in this. But you also have the light side, dark side thing. So Kevin Spacey is in this movie. Yes, I know immediately when you bring up Kevin Spacey, it brings up all these connotations now, where like he's been drummed out of Hollywood, and immediately we can't talk about Kevin Spacey without bringing that up. But he's in a lot of movies, so we're gonna run into him when we're going back to some old movies. And in this, he plays the villain, who is another guy who buys into this crackpot psychic stuff, but he wants to use it for bad things. So initially, this organization is, this kind of secret group is put together to, again, replace violence with like peaceful but superpowered solutions. So you like convince someone psychically to put down their weapons and things like that. All of these weird kind of wholesome alternatives that don't look like they should work at all, but curiously in some places seem like they kind of do. And then and it's very hippie-ish. And then you get to Kevin Spacey's character, who wants to use those psychic powers for violence and to do terrible things. So Bob is tortured by the fact that he has once used his powers for evil, and he accidentally killed a goat. Or I guess it wasn't accidental, but he's upset with himself for doing this. He kills a goat with his mind powers in the past, and he thinks that he brought a curse on the whole secret organization, the Jedi. And that's the one that is most curious, in that I can't figure out any other way that it happened, where he is staring at a goat for a long time and then it just falls down dead. How exactly does that happen? It makes you think that maybe he really has traversed the what we think of as real physics and real possibilities, and has used his mind to kill a goat, and it tortures him. And so And toward the end of the movie, we find out that Kevin Spacey's character has actually put the Jedi back together again, but now he's gotten rid of the hippie stuff, and he's just trying to come up with ways to do violence through the psychic powers, and he's got a bunch of goats, and he's trying to make that happen again. And so our heroes in this have to find a way to bring that whole thing down, and they end up finding it again through a series of what look like coincidences. Throughout this, like I said, Ewan McGregor's character keeps going kind of back and forth, where he's buying into it, and then he's starting to think that George Clooney is the madman that he appears to be, and then something else happens that kind of convinces him again, and he waffles back and forth, and he gets him into a whole lot of dangerous situations. Like right at the beginning when they go to Iraq, they end up getting picked up by some criminals that initially they think are Al-Qaeda, but it turns out that they're not, and they just want to sell them for money. And throughout the movie, just horrible things like that keep happening to them. And then as they're wandering around in the desert trying to figure out how in the world they're going to survive, Ewan McGregor's character figures out that Bob, George Clooney, is apparently appears to be here for no good reason. That he thought he talked to Jeff Bridges' character or through his mind. That he that Jeff Bridges' character just appeared to him through like a mindscape, through a vision or something, and told him to come find him, and that's the mission that he's on. And Ewan McGregor's character's like, Lynn, this is ridiculous. Like, there is no mission. You're not even here for any real reason. And then miraculously, as they think they're going to die in the desert, a helicopter comes down. There's a lot of, is this really happening in this movie? There's some like unreliable narrator and stuff. Ewan McGregor's character is narrating a lot of the movie, and I'm not sure how much of it and this is kind of my biggest critique of this, I think, is that I'm not totally sure how much of what he says is happening I'm supposed to actually really buy, especially with the ending, which I don't want to give away in case you want to look at this, but the end of this is a lot like the ending of Birdman, where I don't know if it's actually really happening. I don't know if it's really in the character's head, but it seems, more than implausible, and that makes me question a lot of the rest of the movie, since he's the guy who's telling us about a lot of the things that are happening. So anyway, when they're lying in the desert thinking they're gonna die, there's suddenly this body of water that just miraculously they find. And I don't know if that's actually really there or not. And I guess I'm kind of okay with that ambiguity, but that ending makes it really weird, where now I'm not sure about a lot of anything, of what I'm really supposed to especially some of the coincidences, like what I'm supposed to take as really happening or not. A helicopter comes down and takes them to the new Jedi facility. And I'm like, well, how did they know they were there? How in the world does this happen? And for a long time, it makes me wonder, okay, is it going to turn out that this guy really does have psychic powers? And I'm constantly questioning that, but I'm also really, really, really suspicious of it, because this is supposed to be based on a true story. So if we're just suddenly told, yes, there was a mind link and they talked to each other and he told him to come there, or he had a vision of him, of Jeff Bridges' character, then I'm going to be like, oh, okay, well, this is where it stops being like real life, because if that actually really happened, it feels like we'd all have heard more about it. It's hard for me to buy that that's actually, really what happened. And again, this is loosely based on a true story, but it would be very strange if we went that far. And we find out from Jeff Bridges' character, and I like this a lot, I like how long it takes to finally get this, that George Clooney's character, Bob, actually talked to somebody else that was in the group that told them about this new group and that he should go there. And he seems to have, George Clooney's character, no memory of it, which is really interesting. So, like, he seems really full of it throughout the movie, but then you find out that he really believes everything he's saying, and he keeps accomplishing things. He's also screwing up a lot of stuff, but he's accomplishing things just through the sheer power of belief. So even if he doesn't have the abilities he thinks he has, the fact that he believes he has them does create a mind over matter thing, in the sense that it gives him the confidence to do things that he otherwise wouldn't do, which is really interesting. So even though we're pretty sure that there's not any supernatural reason that he ultimately was able to go find the new Jedi group, there are other places where it's, I guess, possible that there is some truth to things that he's saying. There's weird stuff like the death touch, where he claims that somebody did a death touch on him, which is supposed to just with one touch kill you. And Ewan McGregor's character, Lynn, he's like, so it kills you right away. And he's like, no, I got the death touch. I'm going to die. It happens eventually. And there's a lot of things like that where you can spin anything that's happened to you in such a way where that's supposed to be the cause of it, where it's like, okay, it's been 18 years, anything that I get now or that happens to me that kills me, I can just say that was the death touch. And so, doesn't seem like there's any truth to that at all. But then how do you explain the goat thing? It's a question. So I like this movie okay. I'm gonna give it a marginal I'm feeling it. I was not in love with this. That ending throws me for a loop, and I'm not totally sure what to make of it. It makes me question more of the movie than I think the movie wants me to. And I also just don't totally know if I buy that by the end of the movie, Lynn is completely won over by the Jedi idea. By the end of the movie, like this is his character arc. He finds new purpose, and he no longer cares about impressing his wife anymore or proving that he's a man, because he buys into this Jedi thing, and he gets taken in by that, and he becomes one of them, and maybe the best of them. And I'm not completely sure that I buy that it goes quite that far. There's I don't want to call the movie tonally uneven, but there's just something about it that's not quite ringing true to me. It's hard to put my finger on it just right after seeing the movie. And also, just like I said, a lot of the comedy is not as funny as the movie wants it to be, at least for me. Again, some of that might be taste issue, but a lot of really wonderful performances in this. This is a great all-star cast, a lot of really fun, kind of quirky direction and camera placement and stuff. I like the directing in this movie a lot. And it's a weird experience. I guess I feel like there's almost it's kind of just, here's this weird, wacky idea that would be neat to make a movie out of, and then wacky hijinks ensue. And it's just, here's a weird scrape we get in, and then here's a weird scrape we get in. And yeah, there's a character arc, but it's a little broad. I don't want to go as far as to say flimsy, but I'm just not quite buying it. So anyway, it's not perfect, but I liked it okay. So I'm gonna say I'm feeling it. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed today's request video. I'll have another one for you next week. If you'd like me to talk about something, be it a movie or a comic, what have you, for Saturday requests, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Geekvolution. Go to the $15 tier, and if you pledge there, that will give you one of these every so often. You can just do it one time, or you can stay in the rotation and get one every 2 to 3 months. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I will see you again next time.